Picture the scene. It's July 2026. A stadium in North America, packed to the roof, the final of the World Cup. And walking out onto that pitch, in a red shirt with a white and blue trim, is a team that, for almost 30 years, didn't even qualify for this tournament, Norway. At the front, the biggest striker on the planet, Erling Haaland, playing in the first World Cup of his life at the age of 25. Beside him, the captain, Martin Odegaard, a nation of just 5.5 million people, fewer than many single cities, one win away from being champions of the entire world. 90 minutes later, the whistle blows, and Norway have done it. Norway have won the World Cup. Now, how much of a fantasy is that, really? Here's the part that makes this more than a daydream. In this tournament, right now, Norway have already been one of the stories of the World Cup, their first appearance since 1998. Haaland scoring for fun, a team that had won barely a handful of World Cup matches in its entire history, suddenly knocking out giants, beating Brazil in the knockout rounds, before running into England. So it didn't happen, but it came closer to imaginable than anyone would have believed a year ago, which raises a genuinely fascinating question. Not just could they, but what would it actually mean if a country like Norway won the World Cup? Because the answer tells you something profound about how football, and the World Cup itself, has really worked for the last 100 years. So, let's take it seriously. What if Norway won the World Cup? The first thing you have to understand is just how exclusive the club of World Cup winners is. In the entire history of the tournament, since 1930, across every World Cup ever played, only 8 nations have ever won it. 8. Brazil, Germany, Italy, Argentina, France, Uruguay, England, and Spain. That's the whole list. Almost a century of football, the biggest sporting event on earth, and the trophy has never once been lifted by a country outside that tiny group. Think about what that means. Portugal, with all their golden generations, never won it. The Netherlands, 3-time finalists, inventors of total football, one of the most beautiful teams ever assembled, never won it. Hungary's mighty Magyars, Belgium's stacked golden generation, the great teams of Mexico, of Colombia, Denmark, of Sweden, never. The door to that club has been welded shut for a very long time. If Norway walked through it, they wouldn't just be adding a 9th name. They would be the first new name in a generation, and one of the most unlikely of all time. A small Scandinavian nation, with 3 previous World Cup appearances in total before 2026, whose best result in history was a single round of 16 in 1998. Winning the World Cup would be, statistically, one of the greatest overachievements in the history of team sport. So why is that club so closed? Why do the same 8 countries keep winning? For most of football history, winning the World Cup has required a specific recipe, a huge population to draw players from, a deep domestic league, generations of footballing infrastructure, and, crucially, strength and depth. Not one great player, not 2, a whole squad of world-class talent, 11 deep and more, because a World Cup is 7 brutal matches in a month, and the great teams win it with their bench as much as their starters. That's the mountain a country like Norway has to climb. Because Norway's challenge has never been talent at the top, it's been everywhere else. Haaland is, by raw numbers, one of the deadliest goal scorers the sport has ever produced. Odegaard has captained Arsenal, but behind them, Norway simply cannot match France or Brazil, name for name across all 11 positions and a full squad. That's the historical reason small nations don't win World Cups. The World Cup punishes any weakness, and small nations, by definition, have fewer places to hide one. But, and this is the whole reason the dream isn't crazy, it has been done, once. In 1930, the very first World Cup was won by Uruguay, a country of fewer than 2 million people at the time. To this day, Uruguay remains, by population, comfortably the smallest nation ever to win the World Cup. A country smaller than modern Norway, they won it twice. So the small country can't win rule isn't quite a law of nature. It has an exception carved right into the very first tournament. Norway winning wouldn't break history. It would rhyme with its very beginning. Now here's where a Norway triumph would genuinely rewrite something. If Norway won the World Cup, it would almost certainly be built around one man to a degree the tournament has rarely, if ever, seen. And that touches one of football's oldest and most romantic debates. Can a single player win a World Cup? The believers point to 1986. Diego Maradona didn't just star for Argentina, he dragged an ordinary team to the title almost single-handedly, scoring or creating the crucial goals, producing the greatest individual World Cup performance of all time. It's the closest the sport has come to one man winning the whole thing by force of will. A Norway victory in 2026 would be the sequel to that legend. It would mean Haaland scoring in the biggest matches, Odegaard pulling the strings, and a hardworking team around them defending for their lives and springing the counter. It would be a triumph of 1 or 2 generational talents, lifting an entire nation past countries with 10 times the depth, and it would settle a modern argument once and for all. In an era of tactical systems and data and squad rotation, could a single, overwhelming superstar still bend the World Cup to his will, the way Maradona did? If Haaland lifted that trophy, the answer would be yes, and his name would leap, overnight, from great striker into the tiny pantheon of players who changed football history in a single summer. Step back from the pitch, though, and imagine what it would actually do to the country. Norway is a football nation that has spent a generation in the wilderness. Before 2026, they hadn't reached any major tournament since the year 2000, a drought so long that most of the current squad weren't even born the last time Norway played at a World Cup. An entire generation of Norwegian fans grew up on near misses, playoff heartbreaks, and watching everyone else's summers on television. Football, in Norway, has been a story of almost, we know from history, what winning does to a nation like that, because we've seen it. When Uruguay won that first World Cup in 1930, the government declared a national holiday and the whole country poured into the streets. When England won in 1966, it became the defining cultural moment of a generation, still talked about 60 years later. When France won in 1998, it was framed as a moment of national unity that transcended sport entirely. For Norway, a country far more famous for winter sports, for skiing and biathlon and winter Olympic glory than for football, winning the Football World Cup would be a seismic redefinition of national identity. It would be the single greatest day in the history of Norwegian sport, and arguably one of the biggest days in the modern history of the country. Full stop. The kids inspired by it would reshape Norwegian football for 30 years. It's the kind of event a small nation organizes its collective memory around. Everyone would remember where they were, and it wouldn't stop at Norway's borders. A Norway World Cup win would send a shockwave through the whole sport, and mostly a wonderful one, because it would crack open the most exclusive door in football. For decades, the message of the World Cup has quietly been, this trophy belongs to the Giants. A ninth winner, a small northern nation with no footballing empire behind it, would rewrite that message to, anyone can win this. It would do for ambitious mid-sized football nations what Leicester City winning the Premier League did for club football, turn impossible into, well, someone just did it. It would also feel like a vindication of the very thing this 2026 World Cup represents. This is the first 48-team tournament, the biggest and most open ever, deliberately built to give more nations a real stage. What louder proof could there be that opening the door was right than one of football's outsiders walking through it and lifting the whole thing? There's a caveat, of course, the honest one. It would be a triumph built on a rare, once-in-a-generation clustering of talent, arriving at exactly the right moment. Haaland at his peak, Odegaard at his, a golden crop all at once. That's not a model another country can simply copy. Small nation World Cup wins aren't a repeatable strategy. They're lightning in a bottle. But lightning in a bottle is exactly what makes the greatest sporting stories. And it's precisely why we'd never stop talking about it. So, what if Norway won the World Cup? It didn't happen this time. In the real 2026, their brilliant run met its end, as most brilliant runs do. But the fact that we can even ask the question seriously, that a nation of 5.5 million, absent for nearly 30 years, could beat Brazil and stand among the last 8 teams on Earth, tells you something the record books usually hide. The World Cup looks, from the outside, like a closed shop. 8 winners in a century, the same giants, over and over. It's easy to believe the ending is written before the tournament starts, but every so often, the game reminds us that it isn't. A tiny Uruguay won the very first one, a single genius named Maradona won one almost alone, and in 2026, for a few glorious weeks, a country famous for skiing made the whole planet wonder if the impossible was about to happen. Norway didn't win the World Cup, but they proved why we watch it, because in football, unlike almost anything else, the giant can be slain, the outsider can dream, and the smallest nation in the room can walk out believing that this, finally, might be their year. The trophy stayed locked in its club of 8, but Norway rattled the door, and one day, maybe not this time, maybe not with this team, someone from the outside is going to open it. History says so. It's happened before. Just ask Uruguay.